Okay, well, let's get started. This is kind of a unique forum, but Mary Richter and I attended a toolkit through the Synod that was about leading through transitions, and they gave this really simple model of this curve, and I'll have a picture up for them to see at home. And it was so simple, but it was just really, really helpful to think about transitions as a group of people. So there's transitions we may have individually, but as a group of people, it can take a while. And they're just thinking with COVID, almost every single church has been in some kind of transition. And so churches may already be in transition, so they can look back and see times in which this graph has happened in their life or in the life of the church. But we almost all can put ourselves somewhere on this graph. And it's really quite simple, but I'd love to get your insights and your thoughts. And so, first of all, we have, in the beginning of this dip, it's the ending, and maybe called the letting go phase. So sometimes endings are good ones. They're actual conscious decisions to shift and change something. That could be how a worship service is done. That could be a pastor moving on, or it could be anything. So sometimes it's negative and sometimes it's positive, but reactions can still be similar. That people can have melancholy. There can be grief, shock, resistance, skepticism, fear, blame, and sabotage. Isn't that interesting? Even if you wanted the change, subconsciously you're thrown into disarray that you might have all these unconscious behaviors that come up. So, for example, let's say that a church decided that they were going to close a particular ministry they were doing because they didn't have stuff for it. But there are a few people that really had loved doing it or were affected by it and something like that. But everyone had agreed this was a good idea. Then all of a sudden even though everyone agreed on it, there's surface complaints and surfaces things coming up, blaming somebody's, the pastor only does this or whatever. Where is this coming from? Well, there's a processing of ending that hasn't happened yet. And so as leaders and as just people, when we're aware of this, it can be really, really helpful to know that people are just floundering a little bit and that's inevitable. And then to just be really gracious with them in that process. The neutral zone then is sort of when, okay, that's happened, but nothing new has started yet. We haven't called the new pastor, we haven't started the new ministry, whatever that is. And what's interesting is that you have people who want to jump to the new. They want to quick get on with the new thing. Think of this in COVID. So we can see people experiencing grief because they come to church and they look around and there's not as many people as there were before COVID. And so, they blame the people who are home for not coming, right? Like, why don't those people come back to church or something like that? And they may rationally know that's not fair, but they're reacting out of the change. In the neutral zone, you have some people who want to quick get to the new stage. So they say, okay, we're post-COVID, we're done. Let's establish the new thing. And other people want to go back. Let's go back in time to the way things were before COVID. But this is an interesting time where it can't be rushed. So if you see on the paper here, it says there's not really much to hold on to. There's a lack of direction and movement. Participation is down. Energy is spent coping with what's going on. Yeah. Some are ready to move on. Some want to cling to the past out of discomfort. The hard part is not to rush and to hurry and control what's going on, to just let it be uncomfortable. And then finally, we have this new beginning, which is, we found something new to start. We're really excited. There's a lot of energy and purpose. And people have experienced some success, which motivates them to keep going in that direction. So this process, we would love this to take like a month or 2 months or 6 months, but this could be 2 years possibly. So thoughts on where you feel you are on the graph and where you feel atonement might be, and what are some of the experiences you've had with this?
I'm thinking basically from the grief ministry, where some of us just continue grieving because we're so hung on to that. And I really learned that when, we had the classes at the seminary, but then when I was at Transfiguration, the chaplain at Fairview, Southdale allowed me to sit in their grief groups and listen to their stories. And some had been there for a long, long time. It's like, where the grief group becomes your new crutch or something. But again, the point is that some of us can't ever let go. We don't know how to let go. Mm-hmm. And there's a fear of letting go because then, we have to be open to something new. Mm-hmm. That sounds strange in a way, but it's in us. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm thinking of, I read just this morning, I forgot what the study was, where I'll keep the study brief. It was, the summary is, we tend not to want to think unless we really have to. And I think that, so we have the emotional part, we also have the intellectual part, where if we haven't given the tools or grew up with it, we don't know how to forethought. I can't think of the right word now, where you are able to see anything new ahead. And I'm just connecting these two thoughts now as we read through this. So the patience part, I go back to my community training that I was at. 20% was the guideline.
Can you explain that, 20%?
Okay. When we did community development work, and we're working through the McKnight Foundation, East Central Minnesota, and we went to Little Falls for the meetings, and we had the quote experts leading us. And their main goal was to help communities deal with where they are and where they might want to go, especially dying communities, lots of population, etc.
Like small towns?
Yeah, small towns. And even some of the larger towns too, because it's not, like, you look at Mora, Minnesota, for example, it is not what it was even 20 years ago when I was there. They just continue to lose businesses. Well, it's the new vitality for that, because it used to be, it still is the county seat. It's supposed to be the central. Okay, well, they go, you can go through all the processes of documents and studies and community conversations and who knows what. And their teaching was, you always have 3 groups. And in their percentages, they put there'll always be 20% against, but if we get 20% for, that's your critical mass. And the ones stuck in the middle, wavering, will go towards the winner in the long run. Mm-hmm. And, because it'll always be, I told you so, because not everything works. But there were stories of towns that went through transformations, and they do, and they become revitalized, even as a tourist destination. And whatever it might be, I'm thinking of, northern, east, central Minnesota, and so on. And for Bram, the vision was, for this, that, and the other thing, we want good community parks. Okay, I'm already in the park board, we're working on that. But the idea was to develop a community center. And I'll try to keep it brief. Bram now has, you go online, I forgot what the name of it is, where it's Bram Community Center. It is a state-of-the-art facility, first class, not a pole barn like some communities have done. You go to Pine City or something, they build a community city which is essentially a pole barn with a basketball court. We built a banquet facility with commercial kitchen, everything that can seat 300 people or so. Studies were done. Where would our niche be? We're not going to be as big as some of these others, but we're not going to be small either. And at first there was there wasn't, what do we need that for? Who's going to pay for it? Their vision of a community center was not much larger than the building like in Pine City. And they thought that's all we need. And so they were thinking, whatever. And as it ended up, the visionary group that kept taking the lead took a series of years, got to the point we were able to build this facility, have the funding for it, work it all legalese. Member of our congregation ended up being the construction manager. His book was almost 6 inches thick, 4 inches at least, of all the specifications. They were building a first-class building with all the specifications. And once it was built, people were amazed. They were amazed, and then the goal in mind was, no, we're not just going to have a place for you to have your wedding reception in Bram. It's a place where people started coming from all over East Central Minnesota. So
And that happened?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it really did happen. And it's continued to happen because they offer quality service, and there was a business plan for financing and the whole bit. And grant money came in for it, and a lot of work went into it. But once it was developed, I did a funeral for the former sheriff of Isanti County. He had connections to our congregation. I guess he liked the way I visited his dad, so he didn't do it through his own. He didn't go through the big church that he belonged to in Cambridge. That was interesting. He wanted me to do his funeral. And we had it at the community center. So we had all these big wigs, big shots, whatever, from Cambridge come out to our community center for the funeral, and they couldn't have imagined whatever. And the word went, how did they get something like this? Why don't we have something like this? For the city of Cambridge, what they had by comparison was the National Guard Army, which is more functional, where this building was more conducive as a positive atmosphere. Again, the goal was to get 20%. And it happened over a period of years.
Yeah.
With some people really doing the hard work of, there were those of us attending the meetings. I was like on the sidelines. I wasn't in the middle of some of the stuff, but, applying for funding, applying for grants, going through all the specification process, legalese stuff with the city. Who's responsible for what? All this stuff got into it.
So
20% is a goal. Now that's a longer story than you want to hear. How do you do that in a church?
But in that example, like someone had identified a need or a vision and could marshal around that physical thing.
It was a
Which
physical
is in a lot of ways easier.
Yes.
yeah.
To say, oh, we need to put in a lift, or we need speakers, or we need whatever it is. Like those are I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's hard to create a vision.
You need to have something that people can tangibly latch onto.
Yeah, but that's why churches are great at building buildings.
Yeah.
It is difficult. There's a lot of non-tangible stuff that's been going on with COVID.
Yeah.
And maybe the tangible stuff is literally how many people are in worship. Does our worship look the same? And I think that's where the discomfort comes as well. We want to go back, or no, it's new, we got to invest in it, and then there's disconnect.
Yeah, because we have no idea what it looks like.
I think we're definitely in the neutral zone. So yeah, I don't know how we get to I guess we can't force it. Like you said, we can't hurry it. But
No.
That's where I feel.
Yeah.
I am, at least.
I think that some of us may still be in the endings where it's still dawning on us that maybe things aren't going to quite be the same. But as they said here in the neutral zone, it's kind of messy. The participation is down. There's not a lot of energy, and to realize how normal that is. That there's nothing wrong with this church or any other church that's experiencing that. That this is part of like the process of before you can get to something new.
I had that discussion with Amanda a lot about all kind of, like, yeah, not only Atonement, but like our neighborhood, where she's like, I grew up in Burnsville, and there were 32 kids and 3 blocks. I'm like, that neighborhood doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't exist.
When you're cycles
Like
of
your
neighborhoods.
church 30 years ago does not exist anywhere. It's not like we're just not there. It does not happen.
That's true. Like, do you often think about this church back in like the 90s?
My graduating class had like 25 kids in it or something. Like my confirmation class.
Yeah.
Just my grade.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Were you here when my son was helping with youth?
I was in college, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. The point is, I came to some of his events, and he was leading, and the average of 30 kids showed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's
So in my mind, like the transition has been like
yes.
a 20-year thing.
Yes.
And it's not like, and COVID was a shock
Yes.
that kind of like brought all this to bear. But like, if people want what it was, it's just like,
It'll never be.
you know, the world is constant change. And like, you know, working downtown, just empty, barren places, you know, it's like, oh, we got to keep coming down here. But why? Like, what are we doing? Well, we put billions of dollars into the real estate down here. So what? Like, what's the plan? No one has a plan. It just that's fine. It just kind of evolves over time. But no one, yeah, we're figuring it out. It's messy. It doesn't feel good.
And how many voices right now? I mean, think about this politically with sort of the most conservative voices are trying to drag us back in time to some, times 50 years ago. We have, in the church, a lot of people think the solution to getting people back in church, so to speak, is let's go back to whether it's the youth groups of the 90s or the liturgy of this or the whatever it is. And this workplaces too, if we can imagine a future that takes the best of what we had but reimagines it and says, okay, what would happen if we turned these buildings and parking lots into patios and gardens and, livable spaces, walkable spaces, and just reimagined a different future than what we had in the past. And then what does it mean for work? What does it mean for church? What does it mean for politics? To not go back to some old thing, but reimagine something new. And that's where it's awesome that there are visionaries among us in the world, that God made some people to be visionaries that some people think are crazy, but they bring forward really cool ideas that can pan out. And you get some really inspired ideas and enough people to get onto it, and you can move to the future. But what I'm reading in this is that if you're just starting the neutral zone and those visionaries say, okay, let's do this. Some people will be excited and want to do it, but there's just not a collective readiness, and it unfortunately could probably fail.
Yeah, so where I struggle, I'm not conservative by any means, but I understand that feeling. And what I'm struggling with same thing. So when I go into my office, there's nobody there.
Yeah.
It's completely dead, even though we have this gorgeous new office space, 3 floors of, the latest technology, all this stuff. Nobody there. Kind of same thing here. It's like, I understand things are different, and not everybody wants to come back. Not everybody wants to be in the office or in church. But if you don't have actual people, how do you move forward? Like, with everyone sitting in their own home office, it's very difficult to move forward. It's difficult to have meetings with my work. It's like you don't have the same participation. You don't have the same feeling of like a community.
Camaraderie.
So how do you ever get there if people are literally not going to come out of their houses?
Yeah, you can't. You're raising an interesting dynamic of this whole thing, which we don't know what to do with, because like now Target's saying, okay, but was it a third of their workforce will not have to come back downtown or whatever the latest story is, and okay, they'll get certain things done because we got you want to get paid, you have to produce, and I learned decades ago that the ones that were doing more stuff online knew how to measure your productivity at home, so that if you're producing fine, then you can go out and work in your garden. But that's the thing, more of us now, we enjoy being home. I discovered my family again. Not all of that is bad.
No, certainly not.
Yeah.
Not when you're not in a car. Like, people have exchanged family time for just sitting in their car.
Well, that was it. And then you just argue all the way to church. But
But there has to be something in between.
yes, but you're identifying an issue, and I'm not disagreeing. It's just that to move beyond that, because esprit de corps, synergetic, what do you call it? What's the fancy word again? When you develop a synergy in a group, you know what I'm talking about? That does not happen in isolation. And that's when things can really happen, whether it be a company or whatever it was. And, inside of me, it's thinking, well, if we didn't get paid, would we even do the job?
Yeah, right.
Not right, no.
Yeah. But I have been part of groups. I have been part of groups where it's the group that's the payback. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Voluntary association.
Yeah, and how did we rediscover that? Because when that happens, that's something you cannot buy.
Yeah, so I think for me that came into kind of focus last weekend. Last Saturday? I don't know. So last Saturday my kid's friend and her mom, like, we were gonna set up a play date, and she's like, oh, well, come to our church. There's an egg hunt on Saturday. So it's like lunch and then an egg hunt. And so it turns out is this Mormon church in Plymouth. And so, like, my son had classmates that went there, my daughter had classmates that went there, and it was just packed with, like, young families and kids and everything. And it's like, well, how does that happen? Well, because what? There's one Mormon church on the West Metro, right? So and I'll just put all my cards on the table. I think one thing that we're disadvantaged with here is that when everything sprung up 40, 50 years ago, like, everyone had a church and they were all growing. And so, like, ELCA and whoever else, all these churches just went all in on their own congregations. There was no, like, plan, which is fine. Like, there's no plan. And, like, I think Catholic churches, which is like, this is the church. Everyone goes there. It's like, just build your own thing. And we were able to do that for, 50 years. And now, like, there's just so many choices. And now it's like, I don't know, a metaphor. If it rains, right, like, you can put one downspout, and all the rain goes into one downspout and out the spout. But we have, no downspouts. We have no gutters. The rain just goes everywhere. And now it's like, there's less rain. There's less rain. Now, where does the water go? Like, And so, like, I don't know, cards on the table, I would say, like, we need to think about how to consolidate some of these churches and, like, marshal the remaining, congregations together and, like, build some momentum and synergy to get people back in the doors to do stuff. Because, like, nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd. Like, you need a core to get people back in to do stuff, and otherwise you're just by yourself in your office or sitting here alone.
And I thought about, too, this week, Ben. I thought, some churches that have multiple pastors and a lot of full-time staff have a huge advantage in that, yes, there's more people to pastor. But, honestly, a lot of the staff members, because there's a lot more people, there's a huger budget, and then everyone can really specialize and put a lot of energy into that. And if if we had some sort of windfall and we had a full-time visitation pastor and we had a full-time children, youth, and family pastor and everything like that, and I could just focus on whatever it was I wanted to focus on, and we were all working together on these meetings and had all of this energy to go out and do all of this stuff.
Yeah.
That, sure, that's great. And so it is interesting that you have smaller churches can sometimes be disadvantaged because they're trying to do all of the same things that a big church is doing, but they just don't have the resources or the staffing to do it. And so it's
and then you're just spread too thin.
yeah.
So really we should focus on like one or two things that we
And
do
do it
well and do those things.
And really say like what is sweet about atonement. One of the things that I really like is that when we have a visitor, I can see them because I know
Yeah.
atonement. I know members, and I love that because I've worked at bigger churches where after 6 years of me being there were members that would come in because they only came in twice a year. I was never going to get to know them. And so I never could tell the visitors from the members because there were so many members who were just sort of on the fringes. And I really kind of like that about atonement. And if you're someone who wants to be known and to use your gifts, you can just like hop right on in. And so there's really neat things. But going back to what you said, Ben, to decide as a church to start pooling together.
Yeah, that's where I get stuck. Like that's the
Yeah,
messy part, and people are gonna be mad, and there's gonna be a lot of loss, and
that
a lot
would
of
be
grief,
a huge
and
ending.
a lot of thing, and it's like I don't even know. Like as a planned thing that we're gonna do together, and like with other.
You mean like other Lutheran churches in Bloomington?
Yeah, or like even like churches on Old Shakopee. Right? Like I can't imagine they're not in the same situation that we are at this point.
They are. We are to some degree. And I saw it when I was here at Transfiguration years ago, and we were the smaller of the big three. Big three, I mean St. Luke's, Transfiguration, and St. Stephen's. At that time, St. Stephen's was the smallest, St. Luke's was the largest, we were in the middle.
St. Stephen's is Catholic, isn't it?
No,
Actually, that one's ELCA here.
I'm talking about there at the corner of, is it France? Yeah,
France and
90th.
France and 82nd.
Whatever it is. That's a Lutheran church, St. Stephen's Lutheran. And now it's just reversed. The Transfiguration is still in the middle because the situation is we're out of sight. The building is out of sight. St. Stephen's is the big one. St. Luke's is about half of what it used to be. You follow me? It's gone through dynamics.
Yeah, like these trends are coming for everybody.
Yeah, and it's just that switched in the last, 25, 30 years. And, I wanted to mention something too. I'm trying to be quiet because I want to hear what all of you are saying too. But when you talk about us getting together to do ministry, it goes back to our prideful buildings. I've been in pastoring long enough that that's what I keep hearing is that, well, we got this place or whatever.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own, even if they don't say it, they have their quiet pride. So they want to be the place where things happen. And it's hard to define a new being in that way.
Yeah, that's why this is like right there.
Yeah. But
We're
that's
all invested. Yeah.
When
I've given so much.
But when you mention the property thing, I agree with that. That's tangible. People see their building, our building, whatever.
And we're
there's
comfortable.
attachment. There's attachment. It's like
Yes,
that's where they
totally.
That's where they built their faith, and we lost that.
And we're comfortable being the host, where we
Yeah.
invite people to come and
Yeah.
join our church. The idea that we would migrate and be new alien residents in another church collectively feels very, very scary.
Yeah.
I mean, if, for example, Grace came over here, we'd probably be okay with that, right? But then if they're like, hey, you guys join Christ the King, we'd be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Now we're strangers in a foreign land, and that's very, very scary.
Yeah.
I also want to mention too that I experienced this in what they were teaching us between the 80s and the 90s. It really wasn't Anybody remember Mission 90? Yeah, who does? Herb Chilson wrote it because the church needed a boost back then. The conversation being, we have been so used to being the missional church, Swedish, Norwegian, whatever, that's in our genes.
Yeah.
Our goal was to look for all the Swedes. That's in fact is how they did evangelism back in the 20s and 30s. I talked to people who lived near Augustana. They'd come knocking the tenement, the small apartment buildings. And if you answered in Swedish, they'd stand at the door to talk to you. If you ended in or whatever, in German or something else, they would move on to the next door. You follow me? Their goal was to gather Swedes. And to some degree, that likeness, like whatever, has stuck. And so even to the 60s and at the beginning of the 70s, it was the children and grandchildren of those Swedes that held these congregations together. You
Yeah.
follow me? But that quickly changes in the third and fourth generation. We don't care. You know, who wants to go to Sven Scottish Dog Day anymore?
Yeah.
When I was there as a kid, my grandparents took me there as a kid. I remember the Minnehaha Park was just loaded with people. I mean, it was people. And then I saw it how many years ago, and it was not like maybe 100, 200 people. So those old reasons are gone.
I want to flip this over here in our remaining time
Yeah.
because one of the things that's really cool about these little circles here is they say, regardless of what the change is, if you can focus on your why for existing, it really helps for people to feel cared for. And what's interesting is that most churches talk about what and sometimes how.
Yeah.
But it's so common for us to forget our why. And the what is, that's a lot of what council decides. What are we going to do? And maybe how are we going to do it? A lot of conversation. Hey, we should do this. That's a what. Well, how are we going to do that? Let's get a committee together. The why is really, why do we exist and what's our mission?
Well,
And so really defining that, and some congregations have really great mission statements that they may have recently in the last 5 years or so come up with and stuff like that. But a lot of churches sort of can forget that, or it's not really forefront. And I think this is a really, really, really cool reminder that being able to speak and articulate and work together as a congregation of why do you exist is really neat. And so at council we talked about how we're going to slowly start having conversations at Atonement and have a summer worship series and stuff like that will help us to start to articulate the 2022 why, right? Not the 1992 why or the 2010 why, but the 2022 why.
yeah.
With the people who are here, with all we've gone through, why do we exist, and what is God up to, and all of those things that can, when we hold on to that, it doesn't feel so scary.
Yeah.
So,
But that's a deep discussion for some of us.
yeah, and that's
I didn't finish my point. The idea of what I was getting at, what they were changing their teaching, was to move from being this immigrant church, because that was our model, into a missional church.
Sure.
What does that look like? And that's where we differ with a lot of the evangelical congregations. We differ in theology and may question some of their methods. However, the old orchard test. I think of now I forgot the name. I was at the original church. Oh shoot.
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. They've become the largest Protestant church in the Twin City area in the last 25, 30 years. They started in White Bear Lake. I attended there. My daughter-in-law was friends with their worship leader, etc. And so we went there on a Saturday night. And the point is they've continued to grow. It's more of a Baptist lean. Yeah, well, it is Baptist in origin, but they don't tell you that.
Yeah, I think our why is important, and we somehow need to get it out there, though. Like, So I went to my mom's church for Easter. She goes to St. Michael's, which is in Bloomington, a Lutheran church, but they're Missouri Synod. And it's like there's a major difference between the focus of that church and the focus of our church. And it's frustrating because, yeah, it's full. Tons of families, like tons of people going there, although not nearly as big as they were either. But just the message is so much like, we're terrible sinners, and
Well, it's a clear.
that you need to
Yeah, they got
atone
the answer.
atone for those sins. Okay, like I get it. I know that's a lot of Christianity goes that way, but it's so negative and it's so judgmental, and like the pastor, like this is Easter, and the pastor kept talking about how people are losers until we
Wow.
have Jesus, until
Okay.
we accept Jesus as our Savior.
Yeah.
Like you have to do that accepting. Like he's not there until you've accepted him, and he's not there until you're baptized and all this stuff, and it just like irks me. And I'm sitting there through this hour and a half service thinking like, if these people only knew like what grace actually is, and that they could go to a church down the road where they'd actually hear about that instead of about all this negativity.
Well,
So it's like, how do we get that word out there that that's what we're about?
And this is why I'm excited for us to go on this journey, is because I can articulate my theology pretty well, but I don't speak for atonement, right? Like I can say, you can say Pastor Siri preaches a lot about this and believes this, but what I want is when we come up with our why, the atonement's why, hopefully Pastor Siri's why, there's a really good Venn diagram there, a good overlap, right? If there's not, we were like, okay. But then we have a statement that says this is what we stand behind, a clear statement that we can put everywhere and invite everybody and walk up to Lexia and say, what's Atonement's mission statement? And you're like, yes. And I love that because we are different. And I also think we are the kind of church that will appeal to people who have given up on church.
Yes.
And that's the hard part, is the people, these churches that are sort of packed, that have more conservative theology. The point isn't we're not doing the right theology. I firmly believe we have very good theology and they don't. And I will argue that significantly. But the point is that they're so secure in their rightness, and for people who sort of want to just rest in something comfortable and something that's like, okay, I don't want to think too hard about it. I just sort of want to be, I'm in the right team.
It's easy.
It's
In a
easy.
sense, it's easier.
you want to be
Easier.
right, they're telling you you're right, so it
Yeah.
looks like this and I'm right.
But there are so many people who've been damaged by that and have run away, and they think there's nothing else. And so, like if we can articulate and say, no, we fundamentally talk about grace and talk about our belovedness, and then use that as how do we help work with God to shape the world in a better place, that there's hope for a better world. I do think there are people out there who would be hungry for that.
Oh yeah.
But it's not so much that sometimes progressive churches are in the wrong theology. It's just that.
But they're not seeking us out for that. That's the thing, right? Like
Sure.
you're selling to people who are not.
We're
buying.
done. Yeah, absolutely.
And like that, by definition, is just a really tough
It is.
sell.
It really is. And I watched a great comedian. She was hilarious on Netflix. And she talked about her upbringing as a Christian church. And she said, I'm, and of course she doesn't think well of how the messages she got, but she's like, what I heard my whole growing up is God saying, you're broken and only I can fix you. And she's just like, there was something fundamentally creepy about that message of being told you're a sinner, you're awful, you're unworthy, but I and I alone can make sure that you're okay, and yet she just left maybe more damaged, right? And I've just heard that over and over and over and over and over again. So I know how damaging that theology can be. And we in some ways as a church have to grapple with that fact that we literally have psychology behind our back now saying that some of these images, I don't care if you think they come from the Bible. If the fruit is bad, the tree needs to be cut down. And so there's a lot going on in our culture, a lot going on in our church. And for us to be able to focus on our why are we doing this? And I think about that a lot in my prayer time, and on Sunday morning I'm like, okay, why should I talk today? What's the point?
One of the things that evangelical churches do that we don't always do, you'll hear the same things almost one year to the next. I loved when you were using, this is part of what engaged me the first year I was here, the kingdom of the beloved. Just calling it that way. I love it. Gets you thinking on a whole new track, where I'm used to saying the kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Sounds marked. Follow me? Even how we say things. And there again, one of the things, especially if you listen to Christian radio, in the course of an hour, you'll hear the same thing about 10 times. Right? Yeah. I mean, so that you know what they're trying to tell you, and they said it in such a way that kind of grabbed you, and you go away with that message. You follow me? I've listened to her, like this stuff we used to get in the seminary, and they did a thing on Narnia. It was so heady. I didn't want to listen to it. Narnia, the stories of Narnia are beautiful stories that are engaging and whatever, but it was just real good analysis.
Yeah, they ruined it.
Yeah, and I thought, why,
That's funny.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
We don't know how to engage people in a beloved way. Something like that. I don't know.
Well, and to your point, I mean, the way we've set up our service and the way we organize how we gather doesn't lend itself to that either.
What do you mean?
Like, if you're going to come in and you're just going to do the liturgy, it's like you kind of have to work pretty hard to get the sense of grace. Like, you could come in here and sit down and be like, oh, this is just another service. 8:30 and 11. Like, oh, I know what I'm going to get. Like, and if you're going in with like, oh, I know what this is, that's probably what you're going to see.
I see.
Unless you work really hard.
Yeah. You got to almost get to the hopefully sermon and hopefully some songs, but
I don't know that I agree with that for the journey worship. It's very, like, yeah, I can see if you sit down and you go to Heritage, like, maybe it's more structured like that. But I feel like and maybe that's just because I'm used to it. Yeah, maybe like a stranger coming in wouldn't know.
I'm just saying, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Maybe.
that's really good questions, because when we find out our why and we come up with a statement, the whole point is that's the lens in which we look at everything we do. And if we look at this, like Nate has gotten more comfortable coming to me and saying, Pastor Siri, look at these words. Because, we'll sing a really fun song and then there'll be a couple words and I'm like, no. This is not the theology I want people to get. And so he's been so much better about, and there was a song we sang a couple weeks ago. I really like the song. I changed 2 words. 2 words and then all of a sudden the whole thing fit with our theology of grace. But it was, the phrase was the wrath of God. And I said, no, I don't subscribe to that. That is too heavy of a phrase to put on people, and to just sing the wrath of God. Wait, what? And so, but yeah, I mean,
the wrath of God was satisfied.
The wrath of God was satisfied, and I said no. The love of God was exemplified or magnified or something.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I changed, and the rest of the song was great.
Yeah, that's the satisfaction theory of atonement, I think we used to call it anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Blood sacrifice and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry if I talk too much, but I got all this stuff flying through my head, and I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. And it's just how to move beyond that. I mean, like even teaching us back in the 80s and the 90s to move from being the missional church that you grew up with. Pardon me. Yeah, there was a mission. It was to the Swedes. The mission to the suburbs
Yeah.
was build all these churches, gather our members. That's for the most part what sprung the churches, because people were going to the suburbs. We don't know how to reach beyond ourselves.
It's really easy to go to people who have the same education and the same background and the same life experience as us. That's a really easy mission field, and I think that is it's difficult for absolutely anybody if you look at our neighborhood and think, where people are, but also admitting that this is the hard thing about being a neighborhood church. Not everybody has the desire to go to church and has the same theology, so somebody who has particular views on the world comes here, they're going to run screaming out of the doors, whereas someone else is going to be like, finally, this is the church I've been looking for. So this idea of you want to get your mission out, you want to get your why out, so that the people who are weird like you, right? They say, shine your little light so the other weirdos know where to find you. It may not be our direct neighbors, or it might be. But yeah, it used to be that people just kind of went to the church that was down the street from them, and that's what they did, and wasn't too much difference between each.